Hello everyone, hopefully going to be bringing out 2 lectures today, especially for my father's birthday, so happy birthday Daddy. He's 75 today, so in his honour, he lived till 120, Ad Meva Simshana. So we're going to speak about Pesach, Passover, which is coming up in a few days. We're going to speak about, as usual, some of the very deep ideas connected with it. So in this first lecture we're going to be speaking about focusing more on the 10 plagues and what was going on in Egypt. It's a very interesting one. There's a lot of parallels which we're going to see between different ideas. So generally the idea of what was going on in Egypt is Jewish people went down, they were enslaved for they were in Egypt for 210 years, and many of those years they were slaves for it's been over 80 years, I think it was. Yeah, they were actually had bitter slavery to the Egyptians, and eventually God came and he took them out. He sent Moshe, to perform 10 plagues, 10 miraculous plagues. They weren't just any old sort of unusual natural occurrences. The actual nature of the plagues were actually miraculous in the true sense of the word, like real miracles, as in the laws of nature themselves were altered, as opposed to being manipulations of nature. You could think, a great flood would come and drown the Egyptians. Yeah, but you can explain that naturally. But we're going to see that these plagues were actually supernatural, literally supernatural. They broke the laws of nature completely. And this is a very important idea. And what's the idea? Why 10 plagues? Why 10 plagues? Why can't God just take them out without the plagues? So we have to understand what the Egyptians were doing. What's the nature of the Egyptians? The Egyptians weren't just physically dominant. They had this spiritual, I guess they had the spiritual hold of the Jewish people as well. In the Kabbalah, they actually reached a certain high level in one of the highest spiritual worlds, and they tapped into the energy. We spoke about this idea in I think the second lecture we gave about the sin of Adam, about the idea of about the leeching power of evil can leech from the side of holiness after the sin of Adam, and by taking all of man's divine energy, or in this case it would be the Jewish people who represent Adam, because they're the ones continuing his job in the world, primarily after the time of Abraham, where God basically decided that the whole of mankind wasn't going to do the job, so he had to pick a specific person, so his descendants would do the job instead. And that's why you get the idea of the Jew as opposed to the non-Jew now. Of course, non-Jews can also take part in the process of fixing the sin of Adam, but they can't do it on a national level anymore. It can be only done through individuals out of the non-Jews, whereas the Jews can do it on a national level. Right. So the Jewish people, once they were in Egypt, this effect happened of the evil drawing from the source of energy, which was meant to go down to specifically the Jews. So they're immensely spiritually powerful as well. And that caused the Jewish people to be literally impossible on the root level to escape or to get out of the slavery. So that's why actually we say in the Haggadah on the Seder night, on the Passover Seder, that's the one where we all gather around on the night of the 15th of Nisan, and we speak about the going out of Egypt. That's why we said if we were not taken out miraculously by God, then us, our children and children's children would still be there today. 3,500 years later, even today, would still be in Egypt. We wouldn't have any possibility inherently of getting out. It just wouldn't be possible, right? It would be almost like a law of nature in itself, sort of. But God overrid the power of the Egyptians, and he took us out. And He did that by the 10 plagues. Right. Why was it necessary to do 10 plagues? Surely he could have just done the last plague, taken them out, or he just could have just not done it with plagues at all, without these miracles. Right? These miracles are also, if you look carefully at the chapters, chapter 7 in Exodus, chapters 7 to 12, that's where you find basically all the 10 plagues, starting with the plague of blood, finishing with the plague of the killing of the firstborn Egyptians. You find that many of them, God says to Moses, or Moses transfers that prophecy over to Pharaoh. Actually, Aaron said it in the name of Moses because Moses couldn't speak clearly. It was really Aaron who was saying it, but we forget that detail. He said, I'm going to bring this plague in order that you know there's nothing like me in the land. This plague, because there's nothing like Hashem, our God, right? Now I'm going to show you all my power, etc. Things like that. So we see there's a lot of God showing his power through the 10 plagues. If we have a look at them, it's very nice. So we're going to have a look at a chart which took a long time making, surprisingly. It's quite a simple one, but I'm not very good at these sort of things. Let's have a look. There you go. Hello there. Right, okay. So, yeah. Right, so that is these are the 10 plagues. They're actually in reverse order here. We're going to see there's more to this chart. Don't want to spoil the surprise. So anyway, so have a look at this. Number 10 is the plague of blood. It's actually the first one was blood that you can find in chapter 7. Then basically the water, the Nile turned into blood, not just a red color. It was actually blood, right? Then frogs, right? Basically from the Nile came a frog, and the Egyptians hit it, and it produced more frogs, and then frogs went all over the place, causing havoc. Then lice, the dust turned into lice. And it went on the Egyptians, and it was very scratchy, and all these plagues lasted basically for a whole week, except for the plague of darkness, we'll see in a minute. Then wild beasts, then basically all sort of wild beasts came into all types of, even non-wild beasts became wild, like even sheep and stuff like that they started attacking the Egyptians, and that happened for a whole week. And there's lots of details about what sort of things happened. Some of the miracles is that there's a nature of a beast to only be aggressive if it's in its natural habitat. So God actually brought the habitats in with them. So you can imagine a polar bear coming in, under its feet were basically bits of ice, so it felt totally at home with its natural habitat. So it's like basically complete open miracles here. Then you have pestilence. The livestock of the Egyptians basically started getting ill, dropping dead, suddenly without warning. That lasted a week as well. Then you have the boils. The Egyptians started getting types of boils and afflictions on their body, which disfigured them severely. They couldn't stand up, they couldn't lie down. It was very, very painful. It's you kind of feel sorry for them. It's horrible torture they went through. But if you learn about the sort of things which Egyptians did to the Jewish people that was so cruel, this was basically just paying them back for what they did to the Jewish people. It's just justice, basically. For example, the Egyptians made for the entertainment in the Colosseums, or for whatever, the circuses, they made some Jewish slaves go out and catch wild beasts, and some of them got mauled by the beasts and things like that. So, okay, you're going to make the Jews suffer by wild beasts, you get to feel what it's like to be suffering by wild beasts, etc. Then you got the boils is number 6. Number 7, because it's in reverse order. Okay, you're going to see why I've done it in this order later on. Then you got the hailstones. These were enormous hailstones, and more like bombs. They're huge blocks of ice with fire inside them, actual fire, and some of them were blocks of ice with fire surrounding them. This is also an open miracle, the idea of ice and fire coexisting, two opposites. They made peace, so to speak, in order to do the will of God. Then you have the locusts, a swarm of locusts, an enormous swarm of one species of locusts, basically, which devoured basically all the food in Egypt, except anything which wasn't destroyed already by the hail. Then the plague of darkness, one of the scariest of the lot. They had 6 days of absolute darkness. It wasn't blindness, it was actual darkness. If you imagine being in a dark room, you've got a candle, a small amount of light can illuminate and spread to illuminate the darkness. Here, the darkness worked the other way around. If you've got a room full of light, then a candle of darkness would spread and the darkness would spread. And basically, the darkness was absolute. They couldn't see anything, right? The Jewish people, it was totally fine, the light they had. We might speak about that one specifically. And this was interesting. So this was split into two parts. This was only 6 days. The first 3 days, they just couldn't see anything. Right? The darkness was just pitch black. But then it got worse. The next 3 days, the darkness was so thick, it actually had some tangible element to it. And it started getting thick, and it actually stopped them moving. They couldn't move for 3 days. So the other ones might have been extremely painful or irritating or whatever, right? This was psychologically absolutely, yeah. They say something, I saw something many years ago about a person can't survive in darkness for more than 6 days, I think it was. Otherwise they start going completely mad, basically. Right, about like sort of like miners who get trapped down in a mine, even if they survive physically, they have food and stuff there, but if it's complete pitch darkness, it starts to mess with the person's mind. So they had that for 6 days. 3 days they couldn't see anything, and then it got worse. They couldn't move. Imagine just being alive and not being able to move. So therefore, if they're standing up, a person was trying to pick something up, they'd be stuck in that position for three days. Very, very scary. And the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, literally, was the death of the firstborn children. So every firstborn in Egypt, right? So if a household had a firstborn son, died. No firstborn son, the oldest in the family died. If it was the oldest was a girl, I think the girl died. And sometimes you have a few people in the house dying. Let's say the father and the son were both firstborns. Or if you have, we see in the next lecture, not this one, we see that the Egyptians were very promiscuous people. So sometimes you can have a woman might have 10 sons, and then suddenly they all die, and wonder why that is, because they were all the firstborns from different bachelors who were offering their services to be a father to her children. So those are the 10 plagues. And if you have a look at them carefully, they're very interesting. They start from the low down, so the subterranean, from the river, so that's like below land level. And again, the frogs were from the water, which is below land, right? And then the lice, which was created from the dust. The dust is obviously, the dust is the ground itself. So the ground itself, so you see God's control on things below the ground. He's in charge of, he's got the power over the ground. Then the things on the ground, like the wild beasts, the beings which are on the ground. Then we've got pestilence. Pestilence is also on the ground, but it's to do with diseases traveling through the air, but sort of close to where the animals are. Similarly with the boils. We see that the way it started, Moshe threw some soot up into the air and it spread all over Egypt. So it came down from a bit higher from the ground, but then it landed on people on the ground. And then you're ascending to the sky now. God's power is over the weather, right? So that's the hailstones. And then the locusts, which are basically, we're going to see that they were in the air, they were sort of cutting out the sun, So they were actually very high in the air also. So that's the idea of God controlling the creatures which live in the heavens, so to speak. Then darkness, which is even higher concepts. We're going to concepts now, almost, right? God in charge of light itself, right? And then finally, that's the first one, life and death. God's in charge of life. He's the one who's in charge of life, right? So what? Okay, so very nice. So we've explained all of that now, right? So I'll just keep this up for the time being. Why did God have to demonstrate all of this? So the idea is that Mitzrayim, if you look at the word Mitzrayim, it's the same word as Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means boundaries. Yeah. When Moses came to take the Jewish people out, Derek Shaloshes Yomim, he asked Pharaoh, King Pharaoh, he asked him, so I'm not going to ask you to free the slaves, but let us serve our God in the desert for 3 days. Yeah, let us walk in the desert for 3 days and serve our God. Right. That echoes chapter 11 in Genesis. The first time we see God speaking to Abraham, to Avram. He was called Avram then, later on Abraham. Right. He said, "Lech lecha, go for yourself," because the Jewish people are a nation which go. We're walking towards something. We're on the move. We've got a purpose, right? The idea of sitting still and being constricted, that's antithetical to what God wants from the world and what the job of the Jew is. We're on a path going from one stage to another. We can speak about this at length in the next lecture, hopefully, please God, if we get time for it. We go from one place to the other. You're doing a task. You start from where you are now, and you're trying to go to a certain goal, a certain destination, a certain purpose which you want to achieve. In Egypt, everything's constricted. Yeah, there's no moving. In fact, when Moses said that to Pharaoh, this is in chapter 5, I think chapter 2, 3, 4. I think it's chapter 5. Right, chapter 5 in Exodus. Yeah. When he speaks to Pharaoh for the first time, he says, "Let us go in the desert for 3 days." And then Pharaoh answered back, "Mi vo mi ha-Elo'him." Right? This is actually later on. We're going to see another one of the plagues. Pharaoh says, "Oh, you want to go? Who's going? What's this Elo'him? Who is this? Who's going? Elo'him going?" Because, you're in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, you're trapped. It's really, that's what Mitzrayim does. Egypt, Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. It traps a person in there. They're trapped within their own bodies, their desires. That's why they are a very immoral, do with things with immorality between, men and women, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's not sure what the word is for that. Sort of like adultery, that sort of thing, right? So then this type of, they were promiscuous people, right? Why? Because they were constricted by their bodies. The bodies didn't let them get out and transcend the body. They were controlled by the body. They weren't free. In fact, there's a nice allusion to this, because it says in the first of the 10 Commandments, "I'm God, your Lord, who I took you out of the land of Egypt, Beis from the house of slaves." Right, so you can read it, the house of slaves, because we were slaves there, but that doesn't really go with the words, from the house of slaves and the house of slavery, maybe the house of taskmasters. What do you mean house of slaves? It's because one explanation is a beautiful idea. It's because the Egyptians themselves were slaves. We were slaves to slaves, right? Because the Egyptians were slaves to their own carnal desires, their own lusts. right? Their own physical side. They weren't in charge of themselves, right? They worshipped the Nile. The Nile is water. Water always represents, there's different of the four elements. The idea of four elements of fire, water, air, and earth. Each one is spiritually connected with certain character traits. And water, earth, you can understand to do with laziness, a very earthy person, right? Fire is a very angry person or very energetic person, etc. Water is connected with lust and being drawn to physical pleasures. And this idea of water is just like everything becomes one. Do you want to become one with like the holiness of eating lecture we gave a while back? Yep. Eating means you become one with the thing. The idea, and then also becoming one with another person. Yeah, that's promiscuity if taken to the wrong, in the wrong direction, to the wrong degree, right? So the idea of just everything becoming one, just everything, just no barriers, right? But that itself is a constriction, right? Because everything is. That's what water is, yeah. And they served the Nile. Okay, anyway, that's why the Nile was afflicted in the first of the plagues. It's got turned to blood. Okay, so this is the idea of what the Egyptians represented, and in fact, the word paro is very interesting. The word paro, it means porua. It means something exposed. It's just something which is superficial, something which all you have contact with is the exposed part. And of course, when something is exposed, it distracts from anything which is deeper, any spiritual element. That's what paro was. It also, paro is the same letters as ha'oref, which means the back of the head. Whereas the front of the face, basically that thing which corresponds to the back of the head, is actually the mouth or the neck. That is the place where a person can reveal through speech things which would otherwise be hidden in their mind. That's the way you speak out things. How you reveal things is through your speech, right? Whereas the oref means, no, we're putting a blockage. The back of the body and the front of the body line up with each other in terms of concepts which are connected with them. Just the back is sort of a negative aspect of the front side, yeah? So when we're speaking about the power of speech, the power of expressing ideas, of revealing spiritual things like thoughts through speech, the oref at the back of the head says, no, we're blocking that up. No revelation. So this is what, and Kabbalistically, Paro accessed one of the worlds above, called I think Zerampin, I think it was, and he leached from the back of the head, basically in that world. The worlds are formed in sort of like same structure as a human being is. They're sort of like our bodies are mapped onto the reality above. That's why we look the way we are. It's because there's a certain structure to the spiritual worlds, which we spoke about this in the lecture about Lashon HaKodesh, about the holy tongue, how words and things are really the same things. It's just different forms of the same thing. Just like you've got steam, water, and ice. Yeah, you've got the spiritual words, the letters of the Aleph, Beis, the Hebrew alphabet, and then when they come down to the physical world, they take a more physical version of that reality. Yeah, similarly there, that the human being itself, with arms, legs, eyes, etc., back of the head, mouth, right? We're just a very crude sort of reflection about certain concepts which are up in the higher worlds, right? So Paro spiritually was able to leech onto what's called the back of the head there, right? So that spiritual force. The front would be too powerful because the light, God's light, which shines through that lens, will be too powerful. It will just burn up any impure being which wants to come in contact with the revealed reality of God's power. That'd be too much. But they have to get their energy from somewhere. Like we said with the Satan, right? He's got to get his energy from God ultimately. So the pipe which comes down, which is meant to go to man, but the Satan can be yonik. It can be leech off that power, depending on whether man is good or bad. So Pharaoh was able to spiritually, maybe on the soul level, was leeching from that power of the back of the head. That's why he's called Pharaoh. So this reality of blockages of divine light coming down to the world, that's what caused the Jewish people to be enslaved, right? They just couldn't function at all because they didn't have the energy to do that, right? Any energy which was coming down was a trickle which came through the Egyptians. Therefore spiritually they were dependent on the Egyptians, and physically they were. All their food came because the Egyptians decided, okay, you get food now, you can eat now. So you see that the manifestation of the spiritual concepts were, you see, the idea of the spiritual concepts which were going on behind the scenes were manifest and reveal themselves practically in the physical world as well, right? Just I was thinking the other day, so what's going on with the Muslims seem to be taking over the Western world, right? We spoke about this in the Armageddon lecture, right? So people are asking, this doesn't make any sense. Why would all the governments just let them in without resistance? And now there's laws like in England, and there's special laws specifically for Muslims, yeah, that you can't criticize Islam and things like that. Any other religion you can do that, except for Islam. Where on earth does that come from? It makes zero sense. It makes literally no sense, right? The answer is because there's a spiritual reality going on, like we explained in the Armageddon lecture about Islam and the Arabs and Ishmael, is that each different time periods, based on God's plan for mankind, he makes certain nations dominant, and he does that by taking the angel. There's an angel, which is a spiritual force, which is the energy source for each nation, and making them dominant in the spiritual realms. So, for example, we saw that in the book of Daniel. You see that we have the bear and what was it? There was a bear and there was another animal or something like that. Well, there's a bear and an angel. The angel represents the Jewish people, and the bear represents, I think, Persia. I think it was, right? And they don't understand how. And because of that, there was subjugation of the Jews by the Persians. I think it's something like that, yeah. And then the story goes that angel called the bear or whatever is conquered, and then that led to the Persian Empire eventually being conquered, I think, by the Greeks or something like that. I can't remember. You have to forgive me on the details. It's been a while since I went through that book. But you see, the idea of guardian angels, that's what it's commonly referred to as, is whatever happens on the spiritual level, that's transferred onto the physical level, those influences. Right? So we know that when Moses was coming into the land of Israel, well, he didn't actually go in, but he conquered some of the nations first, right? He was worried about the merit of Og, I think it was, and God said, "Look, I've put him in front of you, yeah, right? Go and take his land." So what does that mean? He said, "I've taken the angel of the Emoiri, right, which is the name of the nation which this giant Og was from, and his nation, which were a terrifying nation, giants basically, at least Og was." And he said, "Look, go Moses, step on the neck of this angel. You're in charge of it. It's got no power now. Now just go in and conquer it. Because once the angel loses its power, then the nation itself loses its power as well." So it's a very interesting idea there. Right. So we understand that here in Mitzrayim, the Egyptians had immense power because they were leeching off a very, very high place spiritually, right? and that gave them the power. So the Jewish people were not able to get out. Right. So the way you understand this is that it wouldn't be good enough for God to take the Jews out of Egypt because without any miracles or stuff like that, because the damage or the darkness which was created, or the spiritual darkness which was created by the Egyptians, would still be there. There has to be a removal and a destruction of the spiritual damage which the Egyptians achieved by their creating a false philosophy, of false understanding of reality, right? So if we have a look at all these 10 10 plagues here, we see that on one level, you could say, like we explained, the Egyptians basically damaged the whole of reality, going from the lowest thing to the highest thing, right? The firstborn, right? But it goes deeper than that. Yeah, these aren't just random plagues; they actually represent something else, and they actually parallel another 10. Now we know in Jewish philosophy, right, that all the numbers have very significant meanings. Yeah? The number 1, number 2, number 3. That's why we have a whole song on the night of the Seder coming up, where who knows 1, 1 is God. Who knows 2, 2 is the 2 tablets. 3 is the 3 ALWAYS, the 3 patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. The 4 is the 4 Mois, the mothers, so Rivka, Leah. 5 of the books of the Torah. 6 of the books of the Mishnah, of the oral law. 7 days of the week of Shabbos, of the Sabbath. 8 is the 8th day, where we have the circumcision on the 8th day. 9 months of pregnancy. 10 of the 10 commandments, etc. Right? It goes on to 13 there, which is 13's the 13 attributes of mercy, and the word echod, Aleph Ches Dalet, has a numerical value of 13. So when you get to 13, you're really seeing 1 again. Yeah, the 13 attributes of God is just a revelation of that oneness. That's what reveals the oneness in the world. Okay, so let's have a look at. Right, so let's just preempt this with the idea of what were they doing. What were they doing, the Egyptians? They look at a world which God gave free will. Okay, everyone's got free will to look at the world and decide, am I going to recognize the reality of the world, or am I going to pervert it and twist it towards my own egotistic, sort of selfish means, right? And to do that, you have to build a whole philosophy which cuts God out of the picture. Right? So we know that God created the world in 10 sayings. Yeah, in the book of Genesis, right at the beginning, chapter 1, Vayomer Elo'him, God said there should be light. Vayomer Elo'him yehi rokeh. He said there should be a firmament. Firmament, that means a separation between the high and the lower worlds. Vayomer Elo'him yikovu hamayim. God said the water should be gathered in, and there should be dry land, etc. So there's actually 10 times it says Vayomer Elo'him. We're going to see it's a bit more complicated, and that's a bit of nuance in it. But basically, there's 10 sayings which God did to create the world. Now, I think we must have spoken about this once before, but I'm not sure. We're going to go into much more detail now. There's another set of 10 sayings, right? Those are the 10 commandments. They're called Aseres HaDibros, the 10 literally speakings. You've got the Asora Ma'amoros, Amira, the 10 sayings which God did to create the world. Then Aseres HaDibros, Dibor means speaking. So you've got 10 sayings and 10 speakings, right? And then now you've got 10 plagues. Okay? So we know that all these 10 somehow correspond to each other. What is that? So let's focus on this idea of speaking and saying. And then that will open everything up for us, hopefully. Let's just get rid of this for the time being. Okay, a bit distracting. Okay. The difference between saying and speaking. If you notice, even in English, you've got this phenomenon, is that you say something to a person, you speak with a person. Okay? The thing which speaking and saying have in common is they both reveal a person's thoughts. So you're talking about revelation. There's something which is beyond your comprehension. Through speaking, it makes it accessible to you. It reveals an element of truth. But there can be different levels of how that truth is revealed. When a person says something, right, I'm saying something to you, that means there's me, there's you who's receiving something. We're not on the same level. I'm saying something to you, but you're not really connecting directly to what my thought is. I'm saying something, but it's still hiding an aspect of the reality which is there. Okay? Because I say something to you, you say, okay, that's a nice idea. Can you explain it? No, I just said it. Can you explain it so I understand it, so I get closer to your way of understanding? All right, so you've got to speak it out. Speaking is a process of revealing thoughts, but in a way where you're lifting the receiver up to be on the level of the giver. Right? It echoes the very first lecture we gave on this channel. It always comes back to that lecture. Right? You're on the same level. Right? Now, when God creates the world, it says, Vayomer Elo'him, and then it says whatever he does. Vayomer is Amira saying, Elo'him, if you've been following this channel a while, hopefully you'll get used to these words by now. Elo'him is the name of God which represents him hiding behind nature. It's the name which refers to God's control over nature. Right? So God's Elo'him is the same numerical value in the gematria as Hateva of nature itself. They both have a numerical value of 86. So, in the creation, God wants to give free will, right? So free will means there's got to be an aspect where things are not clear, right? And then we spoke about last week about the sin of Adam, right? Because he had free will. There was a certain level of non-clarity which made it possible for him to sin, right? It's very, very subtle, but it was still free will at the end of the day. So when Elo'him speaks, Elo'him also means a judge, right? A judge is someone who's distant from the person he's judging, right? I'm judging you, so I have to keep myself separate. I have to hide my true thoughts so you don't know how to manipulate me. That's how a judge works, right? He has to be totally stoic and sort of like not revealing anything, so the people tell the truth without having any ideas of having to how to word things in a way, or they say, oh, the judge is believing me here, I better go along with this line of thinking. A judge is someone separate. You can't take that, so you can't bribe a judge, because then the judge becomes closer to the person. So the idea of Elo'him is that God is separate and distant from the world he's trying to reveal to, but it's still Vayomer Elo'him. It's still an Amira. There's still a revelation of the thought. So God has a plan for mankind. He wants there to be light. He wants there to be man. He wants there to be trees. He wants there to be animals, etc., etc. So that thought has to be expressed. The way it's expressed is Vayomer, Amira, saying. So God says. He doesn't speak it out, because that will make it too clear that God's the one in charge of everything. So God says, I'm going to say something. If you want, you can trace it back to me. If not, you can go another way and think there's other forces or other possibilities, right? That's why the word Bereshis starts with the letter Beis, which is the second letter of the alphabet, the number 2. Yeah? You thought the Torah, which reflects reality, start with the Aleph, like the Midrash says, right? The Midrash says, he goes through the whole Aleph base, all the letters of the Aleph base, trying to decide what should start off the Torah, what should the first letter of the Torah be. And it goes through all the letters, and basically they've all got faults in them. And then we're left with the Aleph, which is 1, and Beis, which is 2. And basically God says, let's start it with Beis, because Beis is bracha, blessing, and Aleph is orur, which means cursing. Okay? But there's a lot of good words which start with the letter Aleph, and a lot of bad words which start with the letter Beis. Bad, right? So the Maharal explains, we mentioned him in the Sin of Adam lecture, he was the one with the first approach there, in the first lecture there. It's not that the letter Beis happens to start the word bracha, which means blessing, and Aleph happens to start the word orur, which means curse. Is the nature of the letters themselves of blessing and curse. But I have to explain, it's much more subtle than just good and bad. Curse means you limit when a person curses someone else, God forbid, you're limiting them in a way. You're saying that you shouldn't have wealth, you shouldn't have good health, right? You're limiting. The idea of the Aleph is a limit, right? We'll see. The base is the idea of brocha, multiplication. Once you've got 2, you can multiply to 4, to 8, to 16. When God creates the world, he has to make a world where something can exist outside of him. If it's just 1, the Torah starts with Aleph, that represents God. If there's only God, nothing else can exist. That's the ultimate curse for anything else to exist. Only God can exist. So if God wants other beings to exist, he has to give brocha, base, the number 2. But that entails with it, now there's a two-ness, a duality. There's God and there's something else. We're going to speak about this a lot in the next lecture, hopefully. Please God. Once there's a duality, now as part of the package deal of having another being, there has to be a free will, and that comes with the base. The base comes with the 2 options, right? And the 2 options basically give a person free will, which gives him the ability to choose God and then start the process of coming closer to God from the place where God is not clear, because it's base. There's a plurality in the world. There's not just God visible to us, right? We can see ourselves. We see ourselves more than God, except for Adam. Adam had the realization that God was more real than him, but as we explained in those lectures, exactly where he went wrong. The idea of duality, plurality, the idea of free will, that's the number 2, base. Vayomer Elo'him, Elo'him, that name of God where he reveals but he hides. In fact, there's another meaning of the word Amira, which is not common at all. I think you find it in Pashas Kisavo, which would be Deuteronomy chapter 26, I think. I think so. Let me check out quickly. Yep, here it is. Yeah, got it right. Thank God. Memory is not too bad. Okay, Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 26. We go right to the end of the chapter. Look at chapter verse 17 and 18 here. Right? Es Hashem He'emarto. You see the root letters Aleph Memresh, Amira, saying, you have selected God today, Lios L'chol Elokim, to be to you as a God. V'Hashem, next verse, Ha'emiracho Hayom. Again, Aleph Mem Resh, right? That's the word Omar, which is to say. But here it means God has selected you or singled you out or separated you. Okay? That's just what I want to show you there. To be a nation in order that you keep his commandments. That's the idea of the chosen people. We're chosen to do God's mission in the world. We chose God and God chose us. That's how it works. Right? We're happy to do the God's work. Nasa v'nishma, like we spoke about on the lecture about Purim. the Jewish people accepting the job of revealing God in the world, essentially. So what do we see there? From that root word, hemarto means to separate or to set aside. Yeah, we've got all different potential powers. No, we're selecting you, God. That means we're separating God off from any other potential deities, if you want to put it like that. And God sets us aside from other nations. You know, that, okay, you're my people. You're the one who I'm going to use to fulfill my purpose in the world. Right? So it means setting aside, separating. So even the word itself, amira, saying, means separating, which is strange because it's revealing, but when you reveal, you're causing a separation between the person and the original thought. Now, how does that work? Right? Because before I've revealed my thought, there's no two elements to the thought itself. The thought is just the thought. Once I say something, then if you think about it, like you've got the energy source, the ball of ideas, whatever is in the mind, and then it's expressed through the mouth. You've got two different things now. You've got the idea I'm trying to express and the expression of the idea, which are now separate from each other because they're two different things. The way I understand the thought is nothing like the way that you're perceiving the thought through my expression of the thought. When I speak out the thought, you get a glimpse of what the thought might be, but you don't get the full picture. So now there's a rift, a separation between the thought and the expression of the thought, i.e. the talking it out, the saying. That's why saying, even in the word amira, it contains both elements. The idea of revealing thoughts, that's what amira means, saying. But it also means to separate. It separates the thought, the expression of the thought from the thought itself now. Now you've got two things which are connected, but there's a difference between them, right? So that's the idea of Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. So when God creates a world, and He does it in 10 sayings, okay, 10 sayings, He creates everything, the whole reality which we see in the world, light, birds, fish, animals, human beings. All of that comes from God. It's an expression of God's will for the world. However, it's done in a way where people can make a mistake. They've got free will to choose whether they want to be straight or they want to be crooked. The Egyptians were the best nation at doing the crooked way. They found ways in order to say that God's in charge of the river. No, we're in charge of the river. We worship the river. Remember, right? You've got light. The Midrash says, right, God's the one who supplies light to the world. We've got our own stones which glow, right? So it shows that maybe the Egyptians had electricity, maybe, or they had radioactive sort of rocks or anything like that, which might have glowed, right? Or we see the Bechoros will speak about this as well now, about the firstborns, yeah, right? So is God the first thing in the world? Yeah, is He the source of everything? Or maybe the constellations are, right? So we're going to see that the Egyptians found a replacement for God using the constellations, the stars. They used the firstborns. God is the first thing, right? No, we've got our first as well. Yeah, we've got our firstborns. The firstborns were worshipped as gods, in fact. Besides being the primary priests for their idolatry, they were actually worshipped themselves. The idea of this anything being holy a bit, you start worshipping it as God somehow, a part of God, things like that. Some religions are like that. Eastern religions have a lot of this sort of, they believe in one God, but then they've got all the other sub-gods, Christianity as well, the Trinity. The idea of that there's one God, but there's other bits, however they try to explain it. Yeah, so that is what the Egyptians were capable of doing, right? So they basically took the most fundamental thing, which is God's the source of everything, and they covered it over with what we call, like Mitzrayim, they cover things over, they muffle it, that reality, and they cover over with impurity, right? So impurity in Jewish thought, the word tumah, or impurity, comes from the word timtum, which means a blockage. If a person eats non-kosher food, for example, right? What's that mean? It causes impurity in the body, but what does that mean? It causes a blockage in their heart, not a physical one, so to speak, but a spiritual one. It makes them not receptive to holy ideas, to spirituality and stuff like that. That's what tumah is, right? So the Egyptians, with their power of Mitzrayim, Egypt, Mitzrayim, boundaries, they enclosed and they limited all these different sayings which God said, which to create the world. Let there be light. No, we're going to cover that over. We're going to be the source of light. We're going to be in charge of light. God says there'll be a sky, however it works. They had a way of dominating and manipulating the sky, whatever, man, etc. Birds, fish, river. Okay. So everything in nature, they had their own philosophy. So when Moshe comes to take the Jewish people out, it's very interesting. He says, Koyomar Hashem. So says Hashem, the Tetragrammaton, Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. B'ni b'chor Yisrael, my firstborn son, the Jewish people, right? You call the Jewish people my son, my firstborn son, right? You better let them go. And if you don't, I'm going to kill your firstborn son, Egypt, or Pharaoh. Pharaoh was a firstborn himself. His son was also firstborn, according to the rabbis. So he had a vested interest. He was worried he was going to die as well. At the beginning, he wasn't scared because he didn't realize the power of God. What he did do, though, when he answered Moshe back, the Medrash says he looked through his book of gods, said, okay, there's this God, that God, that God. What was this God, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, right? The Tetragrammaton, I don't know. He says, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. Who is God that I should listen to his voice? Right? The idea of the Tetragrammaton, we spoke about many times, is the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey are combinations of three different words, Hoya, Hoive, V'yiyah, and also Mahava, HaKol. Was, is, and will be. That means God being above time. And Mahava HaKol, he creates everything. The one who gives existence to existence itself, right? And to everything by extension. So that name represents the idea of God is reality, right? Whereas Elo'him, it means God's in charge of nature. But there's nature. Is God really in charge? It's not clear. You have to think deeply to understand God's in charge of nature. But when God reveals himself as Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, that aspect of God, that I am everything, then there's no place for any other powers. So the Egyptians, when they have their book of all the gods, they can't be a Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. They can't be Tetragrammaton, right? They can't be Hashem, as we call the name. Out of respect, we don't say the name at all. Because if they would have that name in there, then all the other gods would be superfluous. It would be stupid to have the other ones. So he looks through his book, he says, this, that God, that God, that God. But who is Hashem? You're saying there's a being which is in charge of everything, which nothing has power to resist him? That means even the forces of nature themselves are nothing compared to this aspect of your God. You're saying he's that powerful that nature is nothing? Not just he manipulates nature, but there's nothing intrinsically besides God. Yeah. When we look at the Ten Commandments, we use that name. There we say, Onochi Hashem Elokecha. I am God. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, God, the Shem Havaya. Why? Because with the Ten Commandments, God's revealing, right? Because now we're speaking about Dibur. We spoke about the 10 sayings, but what's Dibur? Dibur is speaking. Speaking is me, I'm revealing to you exactly what's going on in my head, so to speak. Yeah? I'm going to speak it out until you understand. And the word Dibur, we spoke about Amira being a separation. Dibur, in the words of the rabbis actually use this to refer occasionally to the relationship between a man and a woman, right? Ruhu Medaberes, the first chapter of Tractate Kesubah speaks about, we see a woman doing something dodgy. Is she, do we assume she's actually been an adulterous woman, right? We see like certain, something dodgy is going on here, right? So Ruhu Medaberes, we see her speaking with someone and we're not sure who this person is. Right, it's an unmarried woman in this case, right? We're not sure whether this person is forbidden to her or not, right? So medaberes can mean they saw. There's two opinions in the Gemara in the Talmud. Do they see her speaking with her, or do they see her speaking with him, right? With this person, i.e., having an illicit relationship with him. It's just that we don't want to say words which are, not the cleanest words. We try to avoid speaking about those sort of things which can get a person's mind bogged down in promiscuous thoughts and things like that. So we try to avoid those sort of things as much as we can, not to say certain words explicitly. So the rabbis say, use a cleaner language. They saw her speaking with someone. Right, so that actually refers to actually saw having a relationship with someone. And then there's two paths of how to understand that piece of the oral law. Exactly, do we determine that she is forbidden from marrying a priest only because we saw her actually having a relationship with someone, or is even just by talking with someone? Is that good enough to prohibit her from marrying a priest who's got special laws about who can marry? Someone who okay. Anyway, that's going off the topic there. So dibur can mean connection, right? So when we say the Aseras HaDibros, look at the Aseras HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. We say, Onochi Hashem Elokecha. I, it starts with the letter Aleph now. Bereishis starts with letter Beis, 2. Because when God creates the world, there's a duality, there's plurality, there's a lack of clarity about what the source of the world is, right? But when God says, you know what lies behind the 10 sayings? A spiritual reality, and I'm going to tell you that now explicitly with the 10 Commandments, right? Which are spiritual realities, like we said before in the lecture about Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue. God looks in the Torah and creates a world. The world is just a physical manifestation of the reality of the Torah. The Torah is a spiritual reality, right? We've obviously got the physical letters which we can write down, but they only represent the spiritual ideas of the letters. Like we spoke about, every word is a source of the thing it's the name of, right? So when God says, I am the Lord your God, right? In Bereshit it says, and God said, right? God being Elo'him, that name which God hides behind nature, the mask of nature. In the 10 Commandments, it's Dibros, Devorim, I'm connecting with you, I'm bringing you up to my level so you understand, and that's the idea that God ripped open the different firmaments, and they saw that God was one at the source. They understood what the truth of reality really was. They understood how we exist on one hand, but yet that's no contradiction to the fact that only God is the true existence. We don't understand that at all. That's just a paradox which we can't logically sort of grasp. Right. So these 10 Commandments yeah, is we're using the Tetragrammaton, yeah, Hashem, which means I'm telling you existence itself now. I'm revealing to you existence. And it says with an Aleph, that means I'm revealing you there's only one. You look at the world, it seems there's plurality, there's two. I'm going to reveal you it's Onochi, it's only one. It's just me. Asher hoitzeisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of Egypt. That's the key, right? The idea of taking the Jews out of Egypt, out of those constrictions where they couldn't see the whole picture, where they were stuck in the world of the 10 sayings, where I can't see the truth. And the Egyptians were strengthening that doubt and bringing it to the side of evil, where they're saying, yes, that's the truth. The truth is that there isn't a Shem Havai, there isn't a Tetragrammaton, as we saw, there isn't a Hashem, a being which is all of existence. There isn't one. It's just they've got this, and you can say there's different gods, different here and there, etc. So God took us out of Egypt. It's beautiful. Yeah. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Very nice, physically. But what's really going in that verse, yeah? I, Aleph, 1, the revelation of 1, Hashem, that name which represents reality itself, not just God hiding behind nature. Asher hoitzeisicha, I took you out of that perception of reality which the Egyptians created. Eretz Mitzrayim, from the land of Egypt. We could say the land of Egypt. Land, earth is the place where things are not clear. Maybe you can add that in, possibly, I don't know. And that's called the Aseres HaDibros, or Aseres HaDevorim, right? The 10 speakings, because now you've got the revelation of the 10 realities, not hidden behind the sayings, but revealed through 10 speakings. You're revealing the internal hidden reality now. What is the hidden reality? What are these 10 things? The 10 things is what in Kabbalah we call the 10 Sefiros. God basically, as we spoke about in the lecture about who is God or what is God, yeah, God doesn't reveal himself directly to us because that would overpower us and we wouldn't exist. Like we explained the idea of Oral Aleph 1 being a curse because we couldn't exist. His existence would just be too overpowering. So the way that God does it is he creates 10 lenses through which we can start to have a glimpse. Imagine you've got a rainbow, you've got the colours of the rainbow, and let's say we don't have the ability to see white light, yeah? What you could do is you shine the white light through a prism and you get the 7 colours of the rainbow out, and then, oh, okay, colours, light, okay, there's something beyond that which I can't imagine really what it is, but I'm getting a glimpse of it. It's light, it shines on things, it can reveal. When there's light shining, things are revealed, things like that, whatever. So, God, the way he reveals himself to us is through 10 different lenses, or 10 different, we call them characteristics, or character traits, or, right? So, one of them would be kindness, right? So, when we feel that God's doing kind things to us, we say, there's something about God which is kind, right? And then when he's being strict, he's judging, so there's something about God which is just, which requires discipline and we've got to, and perfection, right? That's the idea of free will, right? We've got to earn our reward, so to speak, in the world to come, right? God doesn't give it to us for free, we have to earn it, so he's like judging us. That's the name Elo'him, by the way. Each of the names of God represents one of these Sefiros, right? So Elo'him is Gevurah. Gevurah meaning judgment, or strength, or control. There are many ways to translate this. Hebrew contains so many ideas, so you can't really translate it in one word. These ideas. Malchus, kingship. Keser, the crown. The crown is the idea of the thing which is above the head, that transcendent, hidden reality where everything comes from. Right? That's the highest of the 10. Then you've got Chokhmah and Bina, wisdom and understanding. Da'as, we spoke about Da'as in the prologue, I guess, to the proofs lectures. You see in the what's it called, in the playlist there, about Da'as. How do we weigh up knowledge once we've got it? Chesed and Gevurah, kindness, etc. We're going to maybe have a look at that in a minute. So these realities of these 10 lenses, which God basically creates everything from, these 10, that's why we've got 10 fingers, by the way. The world works with decimal, right? You think, we've got 10 fingers, you count on your fingers. It's not just because of that. There's a reality of the number 10 in existence as well. 10 fingers, 10 toes, got 10 aspects to the body, right? So these 10 forces, or 10 prisms through which God channels his light in different ways, in order that we can get a whole mosaic of different interactions with God, and therefore start to appreciate God himself on whatever level that's possible, right? Like the colors of the spectrum, trying to appreciate the white light. You can never really understand the white light, but you start to get an inkling of it, right? And when you talk about an inkling of what God is, that's an amazing realization. It's not just you seeing a few colors. You're talking about something very deep and profound you're understanding, right? Because you understand God is kind, he's just, he's purposeful, right? He gives free will, right? Etc. He wants to be connected with us. He wants to have a relationship with us. It could be Yesod, an ultimate one of the Sefiros. Malchus, kingdom, that's the one which actually creates us and the free will ultimately, and creates evil, which gives us free will. Because Malchus means kingship, because you can have a king if people choose him to be a king, so you have to have free will. So part of that package of having free will, there has to be a part of the package of being a king. There has to be a nation, right? Because you can't have a king without a nation, and that nation has to have free will to choose the king as their king. So they have to have free will, which means there has to be an alternative. That means it has to be evil. That's why lots of the world we have is basically from that very final sephira or sphere, right? It's sphere because it's like a ball of energy, I guess, or a lens. Called Malchus, kingship. Okay, right, so now we've got the whole structure now. So we've got God, then he channels his reality through the 10 Sefiros. That comes out with the 10 mitzvahs, the 10 commandments, which is sort of the spiritual element which God's going to connect, or give the ability for mankind to connect to him through, by us keeping the 10 commandments, essentially. All the 613 commandments are basically expressions of those 10, like we spoke about in the lecture of the 10 commandments. And then eventually that light takes a new form. So you've got the form of the 10 spheres, which is very high. Then the 10 commandments, which is, I think, is lower. I think it's that way around. Then eventually, when it gets into the physical world, these 10 commandments, or the 10 Sefiros, start to have a physical form in terms of light, in terms of the firmament, the fish, the birds, animals, man. Yeah, these are all expressions. Each one is mapped onto its Sephira, its spiritual reality, and that's how the world actually comes. But this is right in the physical realm, so therefore now you've got the 10 Sephiros, the 10 revelations of God's influence, but they're in a way where you can finally make a mistake. So now let's have a look at a nice diagram, which I took a long time making, much longer than it should have. Right, and here we go. Yeah, right, professional here. Right, here we go. We've got all the 10s lined up next to each other, so we're able to see the connections between them, right? So these two are kind of the other way around in terms of the way we described it. So let's have a look now. So basically the Egyptians, Focus on this column again. Well, let's focus on this. Okay, so we've got the 10 creation utterances, the 10 amiros. That's Genesis chapter 1, right? You've got the 10 sayings, right, to create the world. Bereshis will speak about this, why what's a saying in itself. And let there be light, let there be a firmament, let the waters be gathered and revealing the dry land. And this is on the third day. Let the earth bring forth vegetation, trees, plants, etc. That's the third day still. The fourth day, let there be luminaries, the sun, moon, and the stars. Fifth day, let the water bring forth living creatures, which includes the fish and the birds. Yeah. Okay. Have a look at Rashi there for the explanation of how the birds were formed. Let the earth bring form living creatures. That's the sixth day where the animals were created, and land animals basically, right? And also on that day, let us make man in our image, right? We've already spoken about what the image of God really is now. I'm just telling you that. When we speak about the Ten Sefiros, that is what the image of God is. They're basically the blueprint of reality, which God uses to reveal himself and express himself to mankind. He does it through 10 lenses, right? So therefore we're made in that image. We're made with a keser, a crown, chacham being the right and left brain, chesed and da'as is not on here. I'm not going into that. That's more complex. Chesed gevura, that's the right and left arm. Tiferes, that would be our torso. Netzach and Hod would be the right and left leg. Yesod would be reproductive organ, and Malchus would be the revelation, would be the totality of what man is, right? It wouldn't be individual limbs anymore. It would be everything sort of revealed as one harmonious thing. That's the concept of Malchus, is the idea of unity. Like we said, the idea of a king is someone who unifies his nation, right? Okay, so these 10 sayings reflect the 10 Sefiros and also the 10 Dibros, the 10 Commandments. I'm Lord your God, don't have any gods before me, don't take the name in vain, remember Sabbath, honor parents, don't murder, adultery, steal or kidnap, bear false witness, and not to covet. Right, now how does it work? So if you remember the way, take this away for a second, right? You remember the way we described what the Egyptians did is they took the 10 sayings that God said and they covered them over, right? And then they made another covering, and then eventually even the most external ones they covered over. So therefore there was no remnant of God's true power in the world anymore, because of the power of the Egyptians to leech off the oiref, the thing where speech is hidden. Remember we said Pharaoh was the back of the head, because when God's trying to speak, trying to reveal the reality of the world, the Egyptians leech onto the back of the head and block that out and say, no, all you're getting down in this world is the back of the head. That's where God's not speaking, right? So we're going to hide that. So imagine peeling, the analogy is given to an onion peels, where you want to get to the middle, you've got to peel off the outer layers and eventually get to the inner one. So you imagine that the root of the 10 sayings, is God being the creator himself. And then God created this, and eventually it comes to giving vegetation for food. Okay, so when God wants to reveal this reality, he wants to take the Jews out of Egypt, so they're able to now be walkers and go towards the purpose which they're meant to be, which has God set aside for them, right? They have to be going on the journey. They have to start to understand that reality is not a standalone thing. It's an expression of a being which creates it, which he hides behind nature, right? The start of this revelation is the 10 plagues. So each one of the 10 plagues was not just a punishment for the Egyptians, right? It says that each one of the 10 plagues was a punishment for the Egyptians. At the same time, it was a healing, some sort of catharsis for the Jews, for the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. How is it healing them? Okay, you see the justice, this evil taskmaster which has been torturing me all these years, now he's getting his comeuppance, right? But there's something much deeper going on here. Is the healing. There was an illness. The Jewish people were ill. They had a rift between themselves and their life force. That's when a person's ill. You've got your life, but your body's not sort of resonating or fully holding that life in. It's sort of getting a bit not not aligned. The life force and the body are not aligned with each other, right? They're not working in tandem, right? So therefore, things not working properly, and so that's how people get ill. So healing means you're healing that rift between the soul or the spiritual life force and the person themselves. So they become not correlate, there's a better word. They work together, basically. So by revealing each one of the 10 sayings, that God was at the source of each one of the 10 sayings, you're healing the Jewish people, because now you're seeing, now I'm coming back in contact with God, right? Now I realize, God's in charge of the river, none of this serving the Nile or water or lust, like we said before, right? It's a mistake. Right, the creatures in the water, right? God's in charge of them, etc., etc. So let's get back to the diagram. We see a beautiful thing here. There's one more question we have to address. Look at number 1 on the list. Bereshis, in the beginning. There isn't any saying Vayomer Elo'him Bereshis. God said in the beginning, but the rabbis tell us that out of the 10 sayings, Bereshis is the first of the lot. What is the idea of Bereshis? The idea of Bereshis, in the beginning, the concept of a beginning. God created a beginning to the world. Everything is contained within the beginning of something. We're going to speak about this in the next lecture, hopefully, if we get time to do it. The idea of the source, the root of everything. The Ramban calls it, Nachmanides calls it, Bereshis was the creation of the material for existence. That means he created all of matter. You can imagine it as energy, if you think of it in terms of relativity and energy and matter, a ball of undefined energy, and each one of the other 9 sayings were forming part of that potential into something more tangible and more real, crystallizing it. That's the idea of Bereshis. Bereshis can mean the creation of the Rashis, the first physical reality, which is this Hiyuli, or this point, or scientists might call it the Big Bang, that singularity. Or you could say the creation of time. Bereshis means in the beginning, the creation of beginning. That means there wasn't any time until then. So when time starts, the very first point is a thing where time can come from. Everything's dependent on that first point in time. If you don't have the first point in time, you can't have time, right? You can't start from the second point, because then it'll be the first, right? That's the idea. So we see that the idea of Bereshis is not just creating a specific, it's the overarching creation of everything in one go. It's just all the other 9 stages are just details being fleshed out, so to speak, right? In a more detailed way, right? So there's a fundamental difference between the first saying and the other 9. That's why all nine sayings, it's Vayomer Elo'him, and God being that name of God, being the judge and hiding behind nature. Vayomer, saying, there should be this, there should be, God said this, God said this, right? There's always saying because you're expressing something specific, whereas the very first one is a totality of all the other 9 in one go. Now, have a look at the plagues, right? There's actually, the plagues correspond to each one of these 10 sayings. So let's start from the bottom. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't know all of them, right? But you find this in the Maharal, the Shem Shmuel, and the Arizal all speak about it. And there's a bit of difference of opinion how it works, but there's basic idea here. I've given you vegetation for food. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing God's in charge of sustenance. When you eat food, it can get converted into blood and it can keep people alive. Okay? It's a very important saying, right? Very nice, you made everything, but how do they keep going? Right? So the Egyptians said, no, we're in charge of the idea of how the body works and how food can turn into blood. So what does God do? Oh, you think you're in charge of blood? Here, I'll show you who's in charge of blood. Right? Very interesting. I wonder what the blood type of the blood in the Nile was, right? It wasn't just the blood in the Nile, water of the Nile turned into blood, all the water which the Egyptians had turned into blood, right? And when a Jewish person took the blood, it would turn into water for him. And when the Egyptian tried drinking from the same cup a Jew was drinking from, it would be blood for the Egyptian, it would be water for the Jew. In fact, it was paradoxical. It was 100% blood for the Jew, and it was 100% water for the Jew and 100% blood for the Egyptian at the same time. It's not that it kept changing. It had some sort of paradoxical dual reality. It's a crazy idea. As we said, the 10 plagues destroyed the laws of nature. They weren't just manipulating nature. It just overrid the laws of nature. Okay? Assuming it's not in the right order, let us make man in our image. I think this is how the Maharal explains. It corresponds to boils. What the boils do, they disfigure a person. A person's got all these boils and parts of his body start to deteriorate, or some might fall off. So instead of the Egyptians saying, oh, we've got in charge of the beauty of man, yeah, man is a beautiful intrinsic being by himself. So no, God's saying, no, the only reason why you look nice, human beings, is because you reflect this reality of my image, so to speak, right? You're just mapped on to my 10 Sefiros, my 10 lenses through which I interact with the world, right? You want to say that you're in charge of how man looks, right? I'll show you. Just give him boils. Give you boils. Okay, let's say you see you fix that. Let's see you look nice and wholesome and whatever after having boils. Now you get to, let's jump to number 3. Let there be a firmament. So what was a firmament? This is in the second paragraph. It's verses 6 to 8 in Genesis. As God takes the waters, which were there on the first day, there's one big water, like we said, and he split it into 2 halves. There's a higher reality and a lower reality called the heavens and the earth. So really the heavens and the earth were not created on the first day, as in the verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It really means in the beginning of the creating of the heavens and earth, and there was darkness and confusion, and then he said let there be light, etc. Right? But really the heavens were created on the second day, right? Because as things in themselves. So you had the separation between the high and lower worlds. As locusts, if you look at chapter, I think it's 11. It's chapter 11 in Exodus. I think so. Right? Is that right? Chapter 11. I think it's chapter 11. Might be chapter 10. Right? I can check it up quickly. Yeah, here we go. Chapter 10 in Exodus. Right, the beginning of Parshas Bo. Right, because if you stop me from sending out my people, God saying through Moses and Aaron, this is the prophecy they're telling to Pharaoh. I'm going to bring tomorrow Arba b'gvelecha. I'm going to bring Arba, which is locusts, and will cover the eye of the earth, and you will not be able to see the earth. What does that mean? That means there'll be so many locusts, right? There'll be so many locusts, they'll be literally covering the sun, and you won't be able to see the sun. So they're going to create a new barrier between the heavens and the earth. That's what the locusts were, besides the fact they eat. That's a different discussion, exactly what that element of the plague was. But you see, this element at least corresponds to the idea of God separating the high and the lower worlds. The Egyptians said, yeah, we're in charge of this separation. Are you? Okay, fine. They deal with the locusts. That they're going to separate the high and low worlds against your will, and you won't be able to do anything about it. Also, interestingly, the idea of the second day of creation is the number 2, like we spoke about before. What number 2 represents, the idea of plurality and separation. The second day, we get literally a separation. The first day, everything was one. Yeah, despite the fact that the rabbis say that even though there was light and dark, if you were there on that day, so to speak, you'd still perceive there's the oneness of God. It wouldn't be a contradiction to the oneness of God. You wouldn't have a problem with that. However, on the second day, you actually see a rift, a schism in reality. You see the higher worlds, lower worlds, heaven, the sky, the earth, the ground, the spiritual world, the physical world. They're two separate things now, with a schism between them. Now, the arba is very interesting. The idea of number 2 means plurality, multiplication. Now you're getting the idea of splitting things and differentiating, and that's the beginning of the process of creating lots of details. Arba literally means, remember, the essence of every concept is in the Hebrew word. So when describing arba, the locust, we use the word arba, which comes from the word ribu, which means many, which is very strange. What's inherent to the nature of locusts, which is basically they're just a lot of things, right? Why don't you speak about the fact that oichlim, right? I think macholis, is there one word that describes it like that? I can't remember. Macholis is something else, right? Yeah, but surely there's another word. I would say the essence of a locust is the fact that it eats everything, right? It devours everything. But no, the Torah says the Hebrew word for locust is many, or literally, I will increase and multiply. It's very interesting. The locust has a certain nature that it works with swarms. One locust, you don't care if it eats your fruit, a leaf off the tree. It's only when you've got billions of them and they're devouring everything, then you realize their nature. The nature is as a swarm of hive mind. You say, yeah, they do things there. And it's apparently, if a locust is separated from the swarm, it's not a locust anymore. This is incredible. I'm not sure scientifically how this works, but apparently it changes some of its characteristics. It becomes more like I guess like a grasshopper or a cricket. I'm not sure exactly, right? It actually changes. So therefore, a locust is a very strange creature which only gets its identity by being part of many, right? And that corresponds, that God sends the locusts, the idea of, oh, you understand there's the idea of rifts in the world and plurality, right? So I'm going to show you something which is the epitome of plurality, locusts, as the verse says, I think it's in Proverbs, Melech ein lo arba, there is no king for the locusts. That means locusts are the ultimate creature in reality, which negates the concept of having a unifier of many members of a group. If they to work together, they need a unifier. Locusts don't have that. Each one just follows the other one. There's some sort of like hive mind between all of them. There's no real leader for locusts. And God's saying, right, Melech ein arba, I'll be the king of the locusts. I'm going to show that even locusts I'm in charge of. Even the world of plurality and where things just do their own thing without having any control, I'm going to show you I'm the one in control. Beautiful, many ideas there I've just spoken out, all intertwined there. I hope you got all the different elements there. Now the obvious one is the second of the 10 sayings. Let there be light. God said, let there be light. And what's the answer to that? You're in charge of light? I'll show you what light is. Who's in charge of? I'm in charge of light. You get darkness. Right? So see, it's beautiful. You see these parallels. They're fantastic. Light and darkness. What's the idea? It's because the light, remember we spoke about in the Hanukkah lectures, yeah? What is that light of the first day? It's really spiritual light. The Egyptians said, no, we've got our light, yeah? Oh, you think, so God says, you think that light is your light, physical light? I'll show you what real light is. So a beautiful analogy to this is, imagine you've got a person from the countryside, right? A primitive person, and he's never been to a city before, and you tell him, you know what you got to do is when you come into the city, you got to go to one thing. It's amazing. It's called a cinema, right? A cinema, you go sit down. It's a big screen. All the lights are off, and you got the projector showing the moving picture on the screen. It's amazing. He's never seen this before, right? And he goes. He sits down, on the chairs in the theatre. And then it's all dark. So what's going on? And then suddenly light comes on, and the train's coming towards him, and he goes, and he ducks down. Yeah, I think the first time people saw a moving picture, that's actually what happened. I think I saw a video of that once. The people were literally scared they were going to hit by the train until they understood it was just a picture, right? So this person's terrified. Oh, what? Oh, wow, it's a picture. It's amazing. When all these things are going on in this room. And then he runs out of his seat. He goes to the light switch, turns the lights on, right? He said, imagine how good it's going to be with the lights on. It's so dark, you can hardly see anything, yeah? We can still see the screen, but imagine how more real it would be with the lights on. But when he turns the lights on, that ruins everything, right? Because only through darkness you can have this facade of a reality, a fake reality on the screen. But once the real lights come on, you can't see your fake reality anymore. Beautiful idea. That's what happened with the Egyptians. Yeah, we've got our reality, our light. Oh, really? So I'm going to give you the plague of real light, not darkness. I'm going to give you real light, and it's going to blind you like a bat in the daytime, right? The bat goes to sleep at daytime because it can't function. There's too much light. I can only see when there's no light. My own way of seeing. But when there's real light, it's blinding. So therefore you see on one hand, the light which God revealed in the plague of darkness, it was darkness for the Egyptians, but it says in the verse there, and L'cha b'nei Yisrael, but for the Jewish people, it was light in their dwelling places. It doesn't just mean that, the darkness didn't reach to where the Jewish people were, right? Yeah, the Jews had the Egyptians had darkness, but the darkness didn't reach the Jews. It doesn't say that. It was light in their dwelling place. That means they got a new form of light. They started to experience this light of the first day, right? It said that this light they had, they were able to look in. They said that they went into the Egyptians' houses and looked for any treasure there, right? Because we're going to see later on, they asked the Egyptians to borrow some of their expensive sort of like gold and silver and clothes, right? And when they went into the Egyptians' houses, they were able to see, the Midrash says, what was in the cupboards without opening them, what was in the chests. They could see all the hidden places of the Egyptians, right? If they had it under the floorboards, they were able to see there. So they had a certain light where you didn't rely on external light, like we spoke about in the Hanukkah lecture, that the light of the fourth day is superficial light, but the light of the first day is, you see, the light which reveals things which are unseeable, right? Which really means the spiritual element of something. But here, in the words of the Chazal, the rabbis in the Midrash, they said that they were able to see sort of like X-ray vision sort of thing. That's the idea of seeing beyond just the surface, using this light. Amazing idea, right? So again, we see that the Egyptians made their own form of light. God says, I'm going to reveal you the true form of light, and the Jewish people benefited from that as well. Finally, what is the first one? The first one is Bereshis, in the beginning. Yeah, the Egyptians said, like we spoke about before, we'll put our own beginnings, our own Rashis. We'll make the sun, the constellations are the source of creation, not God, right? Right? We'll make our firstborns gods. Let's worship them, right? Our idols, right? So this is a beautiful, beautiful idea. Yeah. Is that the Egyptians, there's a few types of idols they have. Primarily it was the Nile. Okay, we spoke about that in the first plague. They also served the sheep. Now we know the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, they were commanded to take the lambs, the sheep, which were the gods of the Egyptians, and slaughter them in front of the Egyptians on the night of the 15th of Nisan, which is the night of the hitting of the killing of the firstborns. On that very night, they were meant to take the sheep. So they're taking the idols of the Egyptians. We said, this is our God. This is our source of reality, sheep. So they said, no. You know the real source of reality is? It's the one God, Hashem, right? Hashem Havaya, the Tetragrammaton, that expression of, where God reveals himself as a source of existence itself. So that, and on the contrary, we take what you think is a God, and we're going to eat it as a way of serving the real God. Right? Because everything's flipped on its head now, right? Right? And we know also that part of what God says, I will go pass through the land of Egypt at midnight. I'm going to kill all the firstborns of the land of Egypt. And with all the gods of Egypt, I will do judgments as well. Even the statues, a metal statue just melt, a wooden statue, idol will just rot, as the rabbis explain. So God was destroying anything which was set up by the Egyptians as being the source or having power. God destroyed the idols. He killed the firstborn children who were served as gods, and he killed the sheep. Now it's interesting, why the sheep? Why did they serve the sheep? Right? How does that tie in with the idea of first? So if you have a look at the zodiac signs, if you're familiar, you'll already be twigging onto this now. There are 12 constellations, right? 12 constellations represented by the 12 zodiac signs. Now, the one for, I think it's April, which is rough estimate, but in Jewish months, the one that we have the zodiac signs in the 12 Jewish months as well, whatever the reason for that is, we might speak about it one time. These are basically different channels where God channels his energy through. That's why people serve them as gods, because the truth is God's divine energy is coming through those constellations and the sun, the moon, the stars, but not because they've got any power in themselves, but they're the channels which God's channeling his divine energy through, right? As we said, God has to use lenses to project his energy, otherwise it'll be too overpowering for us to first of all have free will, and second of all to even exist, because the reality of God's existence, if left unfiltered, would just dissolve everything, and everything would just be God again, and nothing would have independent existence. So there has to be this channel. That's the mistake of idolatry. Right? They see these channels, the light, the divine light coming from these channels, so they identify these lenses themselves as gods, as opposed to understanding it's just a tool of God, if you want to put it like that. So out of the zodiac signs, the one for Nisan is the first month of the Jewish year, right, is Aries, the sheep. So therefore, what you're seeing here is that they serve the constellations. The Egyptians say, right, the constellations are the highest thing we can perceive of reality. What's ahead of all the constellations? The constellation corresponding to the first month. What's the first month? Nisan. What is the zodiac sign from Nisan? The sheep. So therefore, they weren't merely serving. This is all idolatry works like that. They're not serving the physical object because they think the physical object created them. That's ridiculous. They weren't stupid. They might have been evil or misguided, but they weren't stupid. Yeah, I take a piece of wood and I build an idol and bow down. That's wrong. And the idolater bows down to it. He doesn't actually think that this piece of wood created him, but it means that this image, which is represented by this idol, right? It represents a higher reality. It's serving that as sort of like a way of honoring or serving that other intangible reality. So they served the sheep because the sheep, they understood, was a manifestation or expression of the highest constellation, which was the constellation of the lamb, Aries. Oh, Telet, the lamb. So we are commanded to take a lamb and slaughter it and eat it, which means we take something which you think is according to you, it's something which is evil, right? Because you identify it as an idol, right? And we say that idols are evil. Right? So we're taking that which, according to your understanding, is an idol, which based on that we should be seeing as something evil. We say that no, everything is God. There's nothing which is beyond God's power. So even the most highest of the forces in the universe, which is the sheep, we're going to take and we're going to eat it right in front of you. And what day of the month was it? Very interesting. It's the 15th of the month, which is exactly the middle of the Jewish month. It's a time when the moon is a full moon, which means if you think of it in terms of lenses, that's when those spiritual forces of the constellations are at their zenith, right? So if you want the one day of the year where the sheep has got its most power, talk about the constellation of the sheep, it's going to be the month of the sheep, and it's going to be in the middle of the month where it's at its maximum ascendancy, which is the 15th. And on that day we're told to take the lamb and slaughter it. Now that dispels any possibility of any other power in the universe besides God, and we reveal that God is the true gracious beginning. Now, another interesting element, this is what we want to get on to as well, is we said that Bereshis, in the beginning, God is the beginning of everything, is fundamentally different from the other 9 sayings. Bereshis is the totality of all the sayings, but it's sort of the potential, that ball of potential, or it's the root through which all the other 9 get expressed eventually, but they're all contained in a potential form in that very first saying. So the first contains the other 9. Here as well, Makas Bechoros, right? By the way, the 10 trials of Abraham as well, we see this idea. God says, I want you to pass this test of the Akedas Yitzchok about the binding of Isaac, yeah, because if you don't pass this one, then none of the others make sense. None of the others are meaningful anymore. Because if you don't pass this one, then the other ones, people will say, well, he just did it for his own reason, what moral reason. But now if you listen to God, so much so to sacrifice your son, even though it's going against everything you believed in your whole life, then people will know that, yes, he's just completely listening to God, and you've passed all 10 tests. But if you fail this one, the other 9 will disappear as well. Because always number 10, or number 1, depending what direction you're going, it encapsulates the other 9. So over here, Bereshis means beginning. That means the essence of God is the beginning of the world. The 10 the first thing which God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh in chapter 4 or 5 in Exodus is go to Pharaoh and tell him, my firstborn son, right? If you don't let my son go, I'm going to smite your firstborn son. So he's telling him at the beginning, this is going to end up with the killing of the firstborn. Because once the firstborns are killed, right, there's nothing to speak about anymore. God's clearly the only one who has any power in creation. If he's in charge of the blood, the frogs, light, locusts, the firmament, vegetation. He could be one of these other gods who's just got a bit better or a lot better than the other gods. But it still doesn't show there's a transcendent God which is in charge of absolutely everything. Once you go into life and death itself, right, and the concept of time, we see the idea of concept of time because God killed them exactly in the stroke of midnight. That's impossible for human. How do you know exactly when midnight is, right? Especially as the time moves, right? It moves midnight here and midnight 100 meters down the road is probably about a second apart, right? So God did it. So in Egypt, the people who are further east started getting killed first, and then it goes to the west, and then along that longitudinal line, that's how people died, right? Because midnight here, midnight here, midnight here, midnight here, midnight here, etc. Interesting concept of time being right. A bit like time standing still. Maybe there's an idea there. I can't remember. Anyway, idea of night turning into day, manipulation of time. The Midrash says that at the moment of midnight, the night, which is the darkest part of the night, midnight, it actually turned into day. Whatever that means. We see the idea of manipulation of time there as well. So we see that this plague of the killing of the firstborns summed up all of the plagues. It was the totality of the plagues, because if God's in charge of life itself, then you can understand what type of life. Is it birds? Is it fish? Is it humans? Etc. Right? But it's to do with existence. It's the plague which demonstrates God in charge of existence itself. The world only has life and vitality only because of God. That is the 10th plague, which is the final peel of the onion, which peels back and reveals that God's in charge of even time, even life itself and existence itself, with the death of any competitors being the death of the firstborn. Now, I'm going to go through these two very quickly. What does that end up with? Once we reveal that God is the source of the 10 sayings, let's go deeper. And eventually you get to the 10 Commandments, which is after 50 days after the killing of the firstborn, which is Passover. You have Shavuos, which is Pentecost, where God reveals the Torah, which is essentially, he says, the 10 Commandments. Right? So if you have a look, maybe you should not covet. The idea is you should not covet your neighbour's, properties and stuff like that, because that's how you survive. You need your property, you need your food, you need cows, donkeys for livelihood, right? Vegetation. So do not covet, because realize everything comes from God, right? I'm not sure how most of these work. You could probably try it yourself, see if anything lines up nicely. But again, it's better to have the words of the rabbis to guide you with these things, because it can get much deeper than you would imagine if you just pair them superficially together. However, the first one, if you have a look again, compare Bereshis with the other 9. God said, God said, God said, God said, God said, God said, God said this, God said that, God said this. It doesn't say God says this. This is just a statement of reality. It's not that God said. This is God's existence in a way being revealed to the world. There's a revelation to the world that there is a beginning. There's a source. Right? The death of the firstborn reveals this. If you have a look at the Ten Commandments, you shall not do this, you shall not do this, you should do this, you should do this. Don't do this, don't do this. They're commandments. What's the first commandment? You shall or you shall not. It doesn't say anything like that. It's just a statement of existence. I am God. The first thing is you've got to start off and understand before you be careful about the Sabbath day, before you honor your parents, before you don't murder or steal. You have to know there's a reality, a being which is in charge of everything, where it's worthwhile serving him, because that's the only real thing. It's only reality. It's also about the only real thing which is worth dedicating your life to. So you're starting off with the existence of God himself. Just like Bereshis is the revelation of God as a source of everything. He is the beginning. Then all the details come later. Death of the firstborn is the totality of control over all the forces in the world. I am the Lord your God is the idea. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, from the land of from the house of slaves, or slavery, right? That is a statement of reality. And now that you understand there's a God, you can start keeping his specific commandments. And then finally we get to the highest level, it's the Ten Sefiros, it's the 10 lenses, right? Right? So we spoke about the idea, maybe Malchus, the idea of revealing man's being able to function in order to, that's vegetation. We explained this idea that man, now God's created man, but he has to be able to survive in order to do what? He has to have sustenance and longevity in order to fulfill God's commandments. Right? In order to reveal from the lowest commandment, to trace it now all the way back, to reveal that God is the beginning of everything. But that can only happen if we've got a way of existing in the physical world. Right? Corresponding to blood. Malchus is that, like we explained before, is that God revealing his kingship in the world, i.e. revealing and creating the possibility of, well, first of all, creating mankind, giving them free will, which means giving the existence of evil in the world so they can have free will, so they can choose. This is the Sephira which gives man the ability to choose and to do his job. And on the physical level, you can only do your job if you're eating, if you've got food to sustain you. Okay? Right. Let's go up to here. Okay? The idea of chokhmah, wisdom. Yeah? That's light. There's two ways to do these top three, but we're going to take this one. The idea of wisdom, the idea of the light of wisdom. It's the light of the first day of creation. The light where we perceive reality. That's wisdom. That is the right brain. It's the koyach ma. Chokhmah is also letters koyach ma. Koyach means potential or power of ma, of what? It's that aspect of our minds which perceives the idea in its raw, unfiltered state. It just is knowledge. Like when you're trying to work something out, you just can't get your head around it. And then suddenly you get a flash of inspiration. That flash of inspiration is chokhmah. Right? It's just like, oh, what was that? I can't explain it to me. Your words don't work yet. Right? Because you're still just grasping onto this light which has just entered your head. This idea. That's what chokhmah is. The Chokhmah corresponds to Vayom Kimiyot. God says, let there be light, light of insight. I can see something, but it's just light. It's just light without too much tangible elements. Once you break it down, you break it up like the firmament, right? That's a third stage. Yeah, let there be a firmament, let there be separation. Day 2, Locusts, idea of separating between different individuals, right? About multiplicity, breaking things down into many elements, right? Locusts, right? Separating the earth and the heavens, right? Again, separation, the second day of creation, that number 2, right? That's the idea of Bina. Bina understanding is that what we refer to as the left brain. That's the analytical brain, where you break down ideas into the elements. So Chokhmah is you've got the big light, but then you've got Bina is the idea of breaking things up. That's the firmament, where you're breaking the idea up into pieces now. Day number 2, the firmament being the separation between high and low worlds, or more generally the idea of separation itself, breaking things up into parts. The light of the first day, however, like we spoke about in the Chanukah lecture, is the idea of just this perception of the reality of God's oneness. So you're perceiving oneness on day 1, where God said, let there be light, right? That's Chokhmah, that's wisdom. But remember, you've always got the 10th or the first. The first contains everything. You look at this, Keser is a crown. Crown, who wears a crown? A king. Malchus is the final realization and bringing out the potential into actuality. God's plan. God's plan is that he should be revealed in the world. People should recognize him and accept him as the king. That's the process of joining up to God, and eventually the final purpose is the world to come, right? Where we're completely connected with God as much as that's possible, and we experience what it's like to be God, right? Which is the greatest pleasure possible, right? So we have a look here. So that's Malchus is the final sort of physical manifestation of everything which came before it, but everything is there in the source. That's the Keser, the crown, right? And of course, the idea of a crown is something. Well, where this, right? It's something which transcends it. The body is represented by the 9 Sefiros. The 10th one is above the person. It's where we put the tefillin that goes above the head, the phylacteries. That's the idea of where the fontanelle, that's the place where the baby, when it's born, it's got a little hole, a soft skin there, where actually the bones haven't closed up yet. There's a little hole there, and the rabbis say that actually before the baby is born, it's actually learning Torah in the mother's womb, and it's got light burning above its head. Obviously, it's not a physical candle, right? Again, with Agadati, you have to understand the concept. It's got light which is burning above. That means it's getting its light from above it. That's Keser, the crown. That's where we're tefillin, this place where the baby's head is not yet fused, right? Because that is the place where we have this access to what's above, right? This part of the head, right? However that works. So we're speaking about, on one hand, you've got Bereshis. God's revealing himself for the first time. The first revelation he does is, I am the source of creation. I am the beginning. Bereshis, in the beginning. I am the beginning. He reveals that to the Egyptians and to the Jews by showing there's no other beginning. So I'm going to take all the other options, all the other possibilities, and going to destroy them. Right? And in fact, one of them the primary one, which is the lamb, I'm actually going to get the Jewish people to do a mitzvah with it and do a commandment to serve me, to connect with me through this possible antithetical entity to my oneness and my power, right? And show that no, even what you think is a competitor with me is actually working for me. It's helping the Jewish people get closer to me. And that is represented as well by the first of the 10 commandments. I'm the Lord your God, right? Just a statement of reality. And this is what Keser is. Keser, the crown, is that desire, that unknowable desire to do good to mankind. That's what Keser is. It's just rotten, pure will, right? Will is not of thought. It's just something which you can't even describe. When you want to do something, anything which you do, it all comes from an unspoken will, desire, which transcends your mind. I just want this. And then you have a picture of it, right? I want to build a house. So you get the idea, the concept of a house, that's chokhmah, that's the right brain. And then think about the details, right? Okay, I've got to plan it out. What do I need? Bricks, you need to have foundations. And you go through the whole process in your head of how to actually build a house, right? That's bina, that's understanding, breaking things into the parts, into the elements. But Keser is that unadulterated, pure desire for something. And that's when we're speaking about God, that's his desire just to do good. Then God says, right, so how do I do it? It's a machshava. So God has a plan. Then he breaks the plan into details. Right? I'm going to create a world where there's going to have to be free will, and so people could be similar to me by being givers, infinite givers like me, right? Obviously, God doesn't need to go through this process, but for us to understand God has to reveal the process in a way where we can identify with, so we can appreciate, oh, right, so God's basically making a plan, and he's coming up with, and now he's carrying out the plan, which is Malchus, right? So you see again this beautiful parallel between the different tens here, right? The idea of Keser being that primordial desire, that thing which transcends any internal calculation. It's just something which literally comes from the outside. Just like God's existence is understood to come outside of creation, right? And it's only revealed for the first time with Bereshis, right? The Keser is that first flash of revelation. I want to give you. I want to be good to you. I want you to have the biggest pleasure possible, which is being close to me. And that's all revealed by the 10 plagues, but specifically the smiting the firstborn, to show there's only one true source to creation. There's one desire which lies behind all of creation, which is that desire of Keser, the crown, right? The crowning achievement which God's aiming for, the Sephira. And what is that crowning achievement? Right? It can only work through realizing God's the source of everything. Bereshis is the beginning, but ultimately that desire is the desire that we realize that I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. That is, God's the one who takes us and lifts us out of the world of free will where there can be mistakes, and help us connect with him, right? With his reality, not just what he does, to experience God himself. I am the Aleph, the one, the Aleph, O Noichi, Aleph, one, the first letter of the Aleph Beis, alphabet. representing the idea of the oneness of God. I want you to experience me not as there's a you and a me. I want you to experience us together. I want you to get as close to as possible to having that experience of being one with me. Total unity. And that's Kesser. That's when all is said and done, everything gets traced back and recollapses all different elements which seem to diverge from God or reconnected with God and become one with God. And that's what we're going to speak about in the next lecture. Hopefully it's gone very long, this one. Okay, but hopefully you've appreciated this. Said so much here. Just to finish off, the idea of Pesach, is Pesach, right? That's the mouse. Sach, speaks. The word Pesach means Passover, which we're going to speak in the next lecture, hopefully. But it also means Pesach. You can break it into two words. The mouth which speaks. Because while the Egyptians were in charge, you had the Oref, you had that blockage where God couldn't speak. So to speak. But then, when it came time for God to reveal himself, he said, now I'm going to speak. Right? And because of that, the night of Pesach, we have to speak about the going out of Egypt, which is what keeps the primary commandment, which keeps the Jewish people going. Passing on that faith, that amunah, to the next generation, by speaking out and keeping the reality of that unbroken chain all the way going back to God taking us out of Egypt and giving us the Torah at Sinai. That's what we're doing, the Pesach. The more you speak about Egypt, it says after the Seder, you're going to keep speaking about the going out of Egypt until you fall asleep. Right? That's how far it has to go. A very special night. And that's the reality which was revealed on that night. This reality that God is just revealing himself. I will pass through Egypt and I will smite the firstborns. And the rabbis learn, but not a malach, not an angel, not a messenger, not Moses, it's just me. I'm going to do it directly. Right? God reveals to the Egyptians the reality of reality. It's me, and anyone who's detached from me, idols who are leading people astray, firstborns who are making themselves gods, or the constellations, whatever, boom, gone. When I reveal myself, there's nothing else. Right? And ultimately, that is the revelation of Keser, which is I'm revealing myself in such a way to show that there's a reason for creation. And I'm in charge. And everything which happens, all the evil in the world, it doesn't matter. It's all for that one purpose. So I can bring the Jewish people to Sinai to do the mitzvahs in order to connect with me through the mitzvahs and to lift up the whole world in order to get to that final state of Keser, which is that first desire to do good. Everything's for that purpose. And that's all being revealed now, going out of Egypt. So it's a beautiful idea how all the tens line up with each other so perfectly. We didn't go through all of them because it does get quite complex with some of them. So I don't want to go even longer. But you see the beauty of the Torah and how the idea of ideas in nature, the number 10, right? How it corresponds to even these very deep ideas, and they all sort of like intertwine with each other beautifully. All right, thanks for watching, and I hope you see you in the next lecture, which hopefully will also be today, in honor of my father's birthday. Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye for now.